Welcome to Fibroid Awareness Month 2023. Our program is entitled Plastics and Fibroids. This program today is about research. Those suffering from fibroids always wonder why fibroids developed and why do they come back. Research is critical for us to get those answers. The answers to those questions give us power in our fight against fibroids. I'm excited to share an interview that I taped in February with Dr. Serdar Bulun, a researcher at Northwestern University in Chicago. I found out about a National Geographic article on phthalates and fibroids. Phthalates are plastics. They are chemicals in plasticizers, and they are used to make plastics more hard-wearing. They are used in hundreds of products that impact our lives daily, including plastic packaging and personal care products such as shampoos, soaps, and hairsprays. The groundbreaking information that Dr. Bulun will share with us could make a difference in your life and your fibroid experience. Dr. Bulun, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I was really looking forward to speaking with you.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So you studied uterine fibroids for quite some time. I remember when I met you well over a decade ago. And I'm curious, what led you to focus on uterine fibroid and endometriosis research so intently?
When I was a medical student, I was really interested in this hormone, estrogen. Estrogen biology fascinated me. And this led me to the question, what kind of tissues estrogen works on, both normal and pathological. And endometriosis and fibroids were the most important problems or public health issues in our country that are affected by estrogen. That kind of what got me into the field.
That is fascinating to me because I'm just learning how pivotal estrogen is on the body as a whole. So I'm very curious about that. So from your studies over the years, what has surprised you the most?
I was shocked as to how many myths existed regarding both diseases. I'll give you some examples.
Please.
For example, a lot of physicians or scientists will start by saying that endometriosis is an enigmatic disease. It's not. Actually, it's fairly well understood compared to rheumatoid arthritis or some of the other inflammatory diseases. It happens because of retrograde or backward travel of blood and menstrual material and the inner lining of the uterus, which is called endometrial fragments, into the lower abdomen. And in 10% of women, these tissues are abnormal enough to implant there and survive there and cause inflammation. It's as simple as this. But there is so much misinformation out there that people cannot see this directly. In case of fibroids, it's the same story. When I first started, I realized that a lot of scientists and clinicians did not see fibroids as real tumors. Whenever I started to give one of these presentations or lectures, somebody would raise their hand and say, well, I mean, this is not a real tumor. It's all about like how fibrosis or scar tissue is formed. And my response would be always like, there has to be some cells to lay down the scar tissue. Until the year 2011, actually fibroids were never taken as serious tumors.
Wow.
Until this Finnish group cloned the MED12 mutations,
Okay.
which accounted for 70% of all fibroids. This was not the case. And I'm glad that now there is more clear thinking about this, and they are seen as serious tumors. They behave as tumors. They have mutations like tumors. They respond to hormones as tumors. And we both know that they can grow as big as a soccer ball and cause a lot of problems.
Wow.
So these misconceptions and misinformations have always surprised me.
That's really fascinating, and I'm glad that you are sharing that with us, because I've never heard endometriosis described that directly, and I wasn't aware that 2011 was such a pivotal year in fibroid research. And I know that clarity that you've provided is going to help a lot of people when they see this video. I wonder, since you mentioned MED12, would you explain to our audience what the MED12 gene is?
MED12 is a very interesting gene. We have about like 25,000 genes in our entire DNA, in our genome. And the DNA is the same sequence in every cell that we have. MED12 is one of these 25,000 genes, and it encodes a protein. Both the gene and the size of the protein are humongous compared to other genes in our body. The product of this gene, the protein, serves a very important function in the DNA. Basically, what it does is it helps DNA to fold in a certain way so that other genes would encode messenger RNAs
Wow.
and proteins in a proper fashion so that these cells would act normally. So the mutation occurs only in one of the chromosomes. As you know, we all have like two chromosomes, two pairs of chromosomes of each in all of our cells. The mutation happens only in one chromosome, but it's not corrected by the other normal allele. And this leads to a chaos as to how genes are expressed and respond to progesterone. In fact, that's what we discovered in my lab. The changes in MED12 gene and the mutation leads to a chaotic production of proteins that lead to a tumor environment.
That is so interesting, because I'm thinking back over my own medical history, and I'm going back about 20 years now, where I was prescribed progesterone on more than one occasion, and it caused heavy menstrual bleeding. And when I spoke with the clinician, they told me that it would help with the fibroids, but it did the exact opposite. So what you just described with MED12 is just clarifies for me what I was experiencing as a patient, but didn't understand the science behind it. So thank you for sharing that with us. And I'm sure that many of our listeners have not heard of MED12, which is some very important research to be aware of. So I'm so thrilled to speak with you about your recent study on phthalates. And your phthalate research is groundbreaking, the findings. What are phthalates, and how are we impacted by them?
Phthalates are environmental pollutants And they are not considered as serious as some of the other pollutants, such as, for example, dioxin or BPA. This is not because they may not be as dangerous, but we do not understand them well. Therefore, many governments across the world have not banned phthalates through legislation, which is another interesting subject. We were interested in phthalates because we heard that if a woman has a higher concentration of phthalates in her urine, she would be at increased risk for having a fibroid. We were really interested in this.
Yeah.
Right around that time, we discovered that this MED12 mutation affects the tumor cells, the fibroid tumor cells, in such a way that the tumors start producing an internal hormone named kynurenine.
Wow.
Because of inappropriate activation of an enzyme. And kynurenine goes and binds to a receptor called AHR.
Okay.
And once kynurenine activates AHR, all sorts of bad things happen in these tumors. The tumors grow faster, they survive longer, they don't respond to treatments. And a very smart fellow who studied here and went back to his home country, Japan now, Dr. Izuka, suggested that we should look at phthalates and see whether phthalates stimulate this mechanism of kynurenine production and AHR activation. What he found was, in fact, phthalates did increase the kynurenine formation, and therefore they activated AHR indirectly and caused increased tumor survival and resistance to drugs. Which is interesting is AHR was originally cloned, first isolated and then cloned in the 80s and 90s as the receptor for dioxin. And dioxin was the compound that was responsible for the bad effects of Agent Orange that was used in Vietnam as exfoliants. After the Vietnam War, it was found out that the populations, especially female populations who were exposed to dioxin, had all sorts of reproductive abnormalities, including uterine abnormalities, fibroids, pregnancy losses, and things like that. So you could make the connection, almost like you could see phthalates as a milder inducers of AHR, which is the common pathway for also dioxin.
That is absolutely fascinating. And you're giving us a history lesson as well. One of the key words that you used that really stuck out for me was resistance, because I think about how fibroids behave in the body and how frustrating it is as a patient to undergo a major surgery and have fibroids return. For me, fibroids returned in under probably between 9 to 12 months. Each time I had a major surgery, they were back and I was again experiencing heavy menstrual bleeding. And I think about the resistance that the fibroids seem to display in the body. They continue to grow despite the surgical interventions and any, for me, dietary changes that I would make, could only provide an incremental benefit to me personally. And so what you just described is just really groundbreaking. And I think, we haven't traditionally talked about the environmental impacts of or how fibroids are activated by our environment per se, and we haven't been able to specify a particular catalyst. So I'm really very, very grateful for your research, because it really, you feel like you're fighting against something that's unknown, and this helps us to really focus on some potential concrete influencers of what we're dealing with physically. So it just, I think this is really resonating with a lot of women with fibroids, and I'm just really excited to learn about this, so thank you. So you mentioned AHR, which is one of my later questions, but since you did mention AHR, I had a note on, an AHR for our audience is aryl hydrocarbon receptors. How does AHR, what is the relationship between AHR and DEHP?
Right. So we mentioned the internally made hormone kynurenine, which activates AHR. So kynurenine is made of an amino acid with which most of us are fairly familiar, especially during Thanksgiving. It's tryptophan.
Oh, okay.
So tryptophan is taken up, it's an amino acid. It's very rich in Turkey, right? So, and just like any other amino acids, tryptophan is taken up by different cells in the body from outside into the cytoplasm of the cell, and then is metabolized there further. So one of the enzymes that metabolizes tryptophan is called TDO2, tryptophan deoxygenase 2. And this enzyme's product is kynurenine. And kynurenine, again, if it's produced in very high levels, it does bad things, like increasing the half-life of a tumor, helping with the survival of a tumor, and things like that. So what phthalates do is, A, they increase the uptake of tryptophan by the fibroid cells. B, they increase the production of kynurenine.
Okay.
So therefore, they do help for tumor cells to survive longer and, again, be more resistant to the natural defenses of the body or the medications against fibroids.
Right. And that helps me to understand how those higher levels would then cause the growth of fibroids in the body. That's really interesting. So do we know how long phthalates stay in the body? I know you said that they can be detected in urine samples.
I think they could be staying long, but I'm not going to get into areas in which I'm not an expert
I appreciate that.
And I do not know exactly how long they stay, but long enough to cause problems.
Okay, all right. How soon could we potentially see more AHR research?
Soon.
Okay.
We are working on it actively. I suspect there may be more laboratories, both in the US and other parts of the world, who might be who might be working on AHR. I think it's a very important target.
Me too.
For fibroids.
I do too. So are there any other key findings on your phthalate research that you'd like to share with our audience? I just want to make sure that we cover the major topics.
Yes. So phthalates, as you know, is a general name for a large number of compounds. And there are certain compounds in these phthalates that could be more dangerous than others. In general, phthalates have like multiple phenol rings, just like many other environmental pollutants, or sometimes medications that we take, and they live for long times in any environment. In the body, once a certain phthalate is ingested, it is metabolized to different products. In fact, the one phthalate, environmental phthalate, is called DEHP, and the body, human body, metabolizes it in different tissues, such as the liver, to MEHHP. And we think that this MEHHP is the most dangerous phthalate that would prolong the survival of fibroid tumors.
Wow. Okay, you're giving us a lot of information to consider here today. Well, Dr. Bulun, I'm excited to share with our audience that you'll be speaking at our Fibroid Summit in September, our 3rd annual Fibroid Summit, and we're really looking forward to continuing this conversation on your research, the phthalate research, and the other just really impressive body of work that you have contributed to women's health over the years. So I'm deeply grateful for all that you do. And last question, how can our community members follow your research?
Good question. Usually most scientists or some scientists do not represent their research on social media. I still think the best platform would be PubMed.
Okay.
As you know, PubMed indexes all the scientific papers that are published. And most of these papers are peer-reviewed, so that there is less risk for misinformation or embellished information. I would still encourage everybody to go to PubMed, support PubMed.
Okay.
In fact, it is supported by the U.S. government. It's one of the, major services of the government, and probably that would be the best source of information. If you would just go there and write my last name, Bulun, and put my initial S, you will see all my papers.
That's fantastic.
I invite everybody to take a look.
Okay, well, we will do exactly that, and we will provide a link when we post this. And again, I just want to thank you, Dr. Bulun, for your time today. It has been absolutely fascinating to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today for this powerful and enlightening program. If you're facing a menstrual health challenge, you don't have to make that journey alone. We encourage you to reach out to us at fibroidfoundation.org. Please join us next on July 12th for an important conversation on workplace strategies for menstrual care. We look forward to continuing to share informative and enlightening conversations with you. Together, we are making a difference. Thank you and be well.